Was a large city, right? You had many of the Jews in Poland lived in villages spread out over the whole country, and you had big cities like Lublin, and it was really from the early days when the Torah, the first chief rabbi of Poland, appointed by the Polish authorities, was a great Talmid Chacham named Rav Yaakov Polak, appropriately enough. Right, Polak is the variations of the name Falk, right? The different kinds of variations, and he was known for being an incredible Anna, very humble, and the innovator of a system of learning that you and I don't know about, called Pilpul. Even though you might have heard the word, but we use it to describe something different. There was a style of learning where they would go with Gemara and then Rashi and then Tosfos, and then they had a kasha, and then they had teirutz, and then they had a kasha, and then they had teirutz. Okay, that all sounds kind of mainstream, but these brilliant minds then would take it into soaring levels of analysis, not for the sake of learning for practical halacha, but for the idea of delving into Hashem's Torah, but because of its exact nature that it was not practical, it fell under severe criticism, and the next generation was Rav Shalom Shachna, was the father-in-law of the Ramah, and the teacher of really a whole generation of Gedolim, of the Maharshal, and Rav Chaim ben Betzalel, who's the older brother of the Maharal, and Rav Yeshua Falk, and the Grace in the Place, the Drisha, the Prisha and the Drisha, Mary Anayim, and anyway, these are Gedolim. But Pilpul, which was all the rage back then, fell under great criticism and was ultimately clearly outmoded. The Vilna Gaon pretty much gave it to Maki Bapatish, the death knell when he went against it as a formal mode of study. The Vilna Gaon advocated, like so many others, that we should learn simple, straightforward from the Gemara to the practical, to understand what Hashem wants us to do in this world. But this is the beginning of Poland as a brimming, exciting place of learning. Right around the corner here, much later in Polish history, was the yeshiva, the story we're about to tell after Mincha, that was built starting in 1924 by a visionary who we heard about yesterday, Rav Meir Shapiro, who had the idea of a teacher seminary for Beis Yaakov. It was built to last 1,000 years. They opened in 1930, and it lasted 9 years. And the Nazis closed its doors, arrested its students and rebbes. Where we're pulling in right now, they gathered all the Jews of Lublin. It had, among other things, the greatest library of Sifrei Kodesh in Europe, over 100,000 volumes of different Sifrei Kodesh, and they put them right where we're driving at this moment.
It's a hotel now?
In the presence of all of the Jews of Lublin, they made a bonfire burning our holy books right here. When I came in the 90s, it was a dental school and served for medical purposes. Now it's been converted, slightly less tackily, into a Hotel Ilan, and not a great place to stay. Pretty rooms, but nasty establishment, and that was why I thought License might be nicer. That was the move last night.
Thank you, Rabbi Bleiweiss.
Yeah, that works, right? That was good. Anyway, but they Baruch Hashem, since the early days, they've renovated the Beis Medrash and made it into a very nice museum. That's where we're going to go. And we're going to tell the quite extraordinary story of Rav Meir Shapiro and his, as we said, his son. Remember, he was childless, but this was his son, and if it didn't actually function as he dreamed it would, it certainly set the mold for many other future yeshivas and has an influence till today.
Meir Shapiro.
reminder of how vulnerable, fragile we are. Thank Hashem for every minute of our lives, right? To daven Rifa'enu for ourselves, for our family, for Klal Yisrael, every tefillah, you realize when you're saying that, you daven for everybody should be well, safe. Daven for Greenwald Shlita. There was a figure, some people are born with creativity, with a certain gusto for life, and an ability to think broadly. His name is Meir Shapiro. You walked in, you saw a picture of him. Quite a grand figure. He only lived 46 years, but what 46 years they were. He mentioned him yesterday. We mentioned he had a son. It's called his beloved Yeshiva, and his daughter. Let's start with the daughter. It wasn't his idea. Somebody else had the idea, but a lot of people have ideas. It's another thing altogether to take the idea and carry it into fruition. And in 1923, at the meeting of the Yeshivas Yisrael, recently, I mean now not so recent, I guess, in my mind, in my life, it feels recent that they uncovered the video footage of the Chafetz Chaim walking. Do you know what I'm talking about? Many of the pictures that you see now enlarged and sort of enhanced with all the Photoshop technology is a picture of and a couple stills of him walking into this Yeshivas Yisrael conference convention, and when it's on video, somehow it's real, right? So he comes in for this, and he presents this idea, and like the Beis Yaakov story that we talked about as well, the idea is ridiculed, and there's opposition to it, and there's a downside. What's the daf yomi after all? You learn a daf a day. Isn't that an injustice? Isn't it? Maybe somebody's thinking about our project of finishing Shas Mishnayos could fall to the same criticism. Isn't it too rushed for the sake of making a siyum? But if you haven't learned the actual material well, is it worth a siyum? We can go in circles on that. That's the criticism. The upside, of course, is immense. Suddenly, Daf Yomi made the Gemara, which I don't know what your feeling is about Gemara. Some of you maybe have a greater affinity than others at this point in your lives, but you know the Gemara is the mainstay of Klal Yisrael. That's what's kept us. And any serious Jew has to know his way through Shas, through Poskim, has to be able to learn Gemara, Rashi, Tosfos. And for many people, it feels like it's a closed book. It's not something they can access. But suddenly, you go to a Daf Yomi Shir, and day out, I could do that. That's manageable. It's 7.5 year cycle. That's somehow something I can picture. Not only that, not only can the common person learn it, but great people can learn it. Who I know people who are learning Daf Yomi. They have a 3.5 hour seder every day learning the Daf, but they learn it with the major Rishonim, and they do it what you can call be'iyun in a more deep kind of a way. So a lot of different approaches to Daf Yomi. It doesn't have to be superficial. Furthermore, you're not just learning what's called the yeshiva charade. There's certain masechtas, you know this, that are commonly studied in yeshivas. The Nezikim, Baba Kama, Baba Metzia, Baba Basra, we just heard about. So these are commonly studied, as is Kedushin and a few others. But what about some of the masechtas that some of us are delving into? Avodah Zarah is not for some reason. And what about you get out into the wide world of Taharos? Some of the other masechtas. Now you can finish Shas reasonably. And when he presented the idea, the Chafetz Chaim stood up and he said this lashon. He said, in the Shemayim, he brought great simcha with this notion. And then the real clincher, the Imrei Emes, who now presides over what had become at this point the largest Hasidus in all of Europe, Derech Hasidim, who were an offshoot of one of our next stops, a branch of Cuts. He said the idea was originally presented in the middle of August, and a couple weeks later, the Imrei Emes, the Ger Rebbe, got up and he said that he's going to officially commit his Ger Hasidus to learn it, to start it after Rosh Hashanah. Suddenly, in every single Polish bookstore throughout the entire country, they ran out of Maseches Brachos, the first Maseches Nishas, and it just took off. There were a couple delays, because in theory it should take 7.5 years. The first Siyum Shas, though, was February 2nd, 1931, and there were Jews across the world who participated. Who knew? People were learning in far begotten places, and nobody realized that it really caught on. Right? We're closer to the siyum than not in this current cycle. I forget the year when it's culminating. Anybody have that?
2027.
27.
I think so.
2027. That sticks in my mind too. And it's a force of nature in our people. Baruch Hashem. His son was another dream that he had. See, before we had throughout Europe, there were people learning Torah. That's the way we are. That's the pulse of our people. Right, we told the story of Moshe Weiss as he went over to the Klausenberger Rebbe in Auschwitz and risking his life to be able to learn Torah. But there were different ways of learning Torah, and even the great yeshiva movement founded by Rav Chaim Volozhin, the student of the Gra, didn't solve all the problems. So the students they didn't have dormitories. Those were expensive to manage. Even a dormitory in Derech with all the complaints, but it's not cheap to run. And so they would live and sleep in people's homes. In Mir, one of the great early yeshivas founded in 1803. Anybody know where?
In Mir?
In Mir, yeah, very good. In Mir in South Poland. So they dormed with different people's homes. And they ate what's called Essen Tag on eating days. That meant some days you had to kind of scrounge and make do, right? And they were, if you don't see Yiddish, Nebuch. Rav Meir Shapiro envisioned that a Talmud learning Torah should go from Nebuch to Nasi. He should be a prince. He should be somebody who's treated with great regard. After all, aren't you all saving the world? You are. Every time you pick up a daf, every time you learn a Mishnah. Your mamash, your Torah Magna Matzah, you're protecting the soldiers in the battlefield, you're protecting Klal Yisrael from all the many dangers that face us. So why shouldn't the person be projected as a Nasi? So he envisioned something impossible, a grand building, beautiful in every dimension, as grand as any of the buildings that the Christians built, with an organized system, with every detail of the Bacher's life thought through. They had a piece of paper they were given. They knew exactly which time of the week they could give their dirty clothes, their soiled clothes for laundry. They would get it back the next day. The meals were all hot and they were served at a proper time. Everything was regulated. Of course, this became very quickly in its opening. It was built it started to be built. The cornerstone set in 1924. They opened the doors in 1930. Immediately became a sensation. It was a yeshiva designated for Hasidim, but not just. Others could also attend if they chose. And even though the Rebbe Meir was a short cover Hasid from that distinction, but he was a people of Klal Yisrael. He was a person of Klal Yisrael, didn't distinguish. And people came, and it was quite elitist. You had to pass. Listen to the Feher. Feher is the Yiddish word for the test you had to pass. Every bacher had to learn, essentially memorize 200 blot of Gemara and be subject to one of the most intense tests. But they rose to it, and in its heights, in its great heyday, they had over 500 students in these halls. And of course, this is just one small division of the grand yeshiva that filled the entire building. And that was the vision, and it came to fruition. It was a place where they sang, where they danced. And his birthday, the students in great Hakara Setov to their Rebbe, they wanted to give him a gift. So they decided, what do you give somebody who has everything? Rabbi Shapiro, he had the world, he had a yeshiva, he had people learning. Nothing else really mattered to him. So what do? They decided for birthday present, they would all do together collectively a Siyum Mashas Gemara overnight. Right? That was happy birthday to you. Yeah. Okay, some people are holding. Then, Vanyansky, we're going there. Overnight, we'll get there. It's a matter of Ratzon. You want to do something? You want to go a place, Hashem will take you there. Rabbi Meir was a multifaceted person, and people realized soon enough, now I'm backing up a little bit in his life, one more piece that you should know. He was somebody who was a doer, and the Jews realized who they had in their presence, and he was quickly elected as the Jewish representative in the Sejm in the Polish parliament. The Jews sat in the Polish parliament, of all things. And he was there for years trying to fight for the Jews, trying to do what he could to help them. The anti-Semitism in those days was open.
it was casual. Nobody pretended. Today, people are anti-Semitic, but you can't say that openly, at least not in parts of America, because that's not so true anymore either. But back in the day, it was open and brazen, and at one point, there was a known anti-Semite who came over to him and to start up with him. He said, Mayor, called him by his first name, he said, that there's a town in Germany that has a gate and an entrance and a sign over it that reads, in this town, no Jews or dogs allowed. Well, Rabbi Meir gave as good as he got, and he didn't miss a beat. He said, well then, I guess neither one of us would be welcome, would we? Please use that again, yeah. He was musical. He wrote songs. We'll sing. We'll sing some of his songs. He wrote a beautiful, memorable song about the Shilshal Yom of Yom Revi'i, which it is today, as Kadosh Baruch was designing our entire trip. Without our really even realizing it, everything just coming out just so. And in the end, he had to leave his government position because he was consumed with the yeshiva. He had to fundraise, obviously, he went around the world doing so. And suddenly he got diphtheria, and at the age of 46, he was taken from the world in 1934. But then again, he was spared the worst. We have a story. Joseph and I were just talking about this. Some of the students got away, many didn't. Many of them were kidnapped. We had taken by the Nazis. We told the story of the destruction of the building and how, I was here in the late 90s, and I remember coming into this room and the hallways smelled of formaldehyde and medicine. It was a medical place, and you cringed at the Chil Hashem. And today, at least, Baruch Hashem, Jews have invested and they've made a respectable museum, and we'll take a few minutes and go and wander and see some of the gorgeous pictures and get a feeling of a world. You have to realize it is our world, but it's not. They were living in a different dimension in time, a different connectedness to Hashem. I'll give you an example of one of the students. There was a student who came to take his Beher, and he was a good boy, learned hard, didn't pass, it happens. And he went to the railroad station to take a pen. In those days, he traveled by train everywhere. Of course, that feels kind of macabre as we think about what the trains would be used for later. But he was taking the train home, which was a couple of days' ride. And while he was sitting there, he was going over the Gemara that he had just failed. And I always tell my students, failure is great if you know how to react to it properly. So that if you fail, you say, okay, what do I do next time? How do I learn from all my mistakes? I sometimes deviously, some of you know this, will give it the same test the next day. Because you can fail once, we just said this, right? You can fail once, but you have no excuse to fail the second time. Anyway, this young man learned that idea, and he was sitting going over the Gemara, and an older man was there watching, not that old, was watching him, and he said, what are you doing there? And the young man explained, and he said, well, why are you doing that? And he said, well, you have to learn, I have to understand what I did wrong. And the older man said, my name is Rav Meir Shapiro, can you come with me? So he admitted him, and at one point this young man, another story, got into some trouble because they had a very regulated life. We're all so used to being independent, some of you are even on your phones as I speak, and that's just the way of the world today, everybody just does its own thing. Back in the day, you had to toe the line, and you didn't, you got kicked out, right? And they had curfews, and you were in bed, you weren't there, roll call, that was it. So they caught this young man. He was in trouble. He was out of his bed, and they searched, and they found on the rooftop. See, they turned all the lights out after a certain point, after midnight, so that was it. But the moon was full that night, and the boy hadn't finished his chazara of the morning Gemara class, so he was learning by moonlight and pacing the roof, trying to get the sugi down just right. And when he was brought to Rav Meir Shapiro and told how much in trouble he was, what a naughty boy he'd been, Rav Meir Shapiro gave him the following blessing. He said, because of your hasmada, your constancy in learning, your zitzfleisch, you should be blessed since you paced to have great mobility all of your long life. You should be blessed with great vision since you used your sight to see by the moonlight to be able to learn Torah. You should have great vision that should last through your life. The Shevet Levi, as he's known, Rav Vosner, who passed away just a few years ago, indeed lived well over 100, was till his last day totally mobile and without any glasses, 20/20 vision through his lifetime. So this is a place of great inspiration. And I'll leave you with the following story. We should daven that Rev Greenwald should get the proper tipul. Baruch Hashem, it wasn't more serious. And we'll figure out the logistics. Complicated, nothing we can't get through. HaKadosh Baruch Hu takes care of us. And but the following story, a true one, well known, is of some of the boys didn't get out and were taken to Auschwitz. And there was a barracks and there was a group somehow together for a certain period of time, 6 young men. The 5 of them without Gemaras in hand, but then at this point they knew it all by heart. Anyway, they sat and they learned Gemara. The 6th was not old. He was on the outs. He was already from an assimilated, ignorant family. But the 5 boys, every night when they were back after the work, they shtaiked. And the 6th watched and listened and heard and looked on with a little bit of envy. The 5 didn't make it, but the 6 young men did get out, and so inspired by the devotion and the purity of their connection to Hashem, he came back. And at his personal Siyum Hashas, he said it over in the memory of them and their Rebbe Rabbi Meir Shapiro and Kadosh Baruch Hu in great Hakaras Tov. He's part of Klal Yisrael. Give you a little nigun, one of them that Rabbi Meir Shapiro sang. I don't know if you have this, if you know this, there's an old one. Chabad has taken it over, but it's not a Chabad tune, it's Rabbi Meir Shapiro. It's this. We say it, some people say it after Aleinu. Utsu etzav sufar. Familiar? Dabru davar velo yakum. Utsu etzav sufar. Dabru davar velo yakum. Ki imanu kel. Ay ay ay. Utsu etzav sufar. Dabru davar velo yakum. Ki imanu kel. Utsu etzav sufar. Dabru davar velo yakum. Utsu etzav sufar. Dabru davar velo yakum. Ki imanu kel. Ay ay ay. Utsu etzav sufar. Dabru davar velo yakum. Ki imanu kel. Utsu etzav sufar. Dabru davar velo yakum. Ay
I have a model of it in my basement.
First model. There's gonna be some crazy edits of this. After the first one, I guess
People open book. Never heard that? The Muslims use that term. Let me make a feature. There we go. Now follow me around. Go to the next postcard here. As you can see, very important postcard. Now come to this side, we can see more postcards. We have an Avi Becker in the wild.
Hey guys, don't get too close. You know what I'm saying? So over here, I just want to explain other Jewish books collections in Lublin. This is beautiful. I don't know what it is, but like it's beautiful. Oh, they would write the book. There's an author. That's the author's name. That be created in 1860. It's like a list of what's called.
Two more.
Wandering books. The library of the yeshiva contains many books published in various countries outside the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. Based on the information collected so far, most were printed in Warsaw, Lviv, and Amsterdam.
Avi Becker, everyone.
Yes. This is Moshe Sachs. You should stay away from him. He's not sharp.
Professor Avram Meir Becker.
Most important from the
Derech or Sameach. Where'd you get your story?
I got the Harvard.
He's a Harvard historian.
Yes, sir. I also got my sleeves from Horseman. Is that a check? Oh, that's a check. So that's good addition. You just passed it. The history of the yeshiva building and dates. During the First World Congress of Agudat Yisrael Knesset Gedolah in Vienna, Rabbi Meir Shapiro put forth the idea of yeshiva in Lublin. As you can see right here, we are in the yeshiva of Lublin. What does that say? I don't know what to say the name. One of the richest Lublin Jews, after getting to know the plans for the yeshiva, donated a plot of 30,000 square meters at the intersection of Ulisa Lubar Suka and Ulisa Unica. Wow. How much did 30,000 square meters cost in 1923? Just the yeshiva when it first opened, right there. I took Game Pugman's job. Interiors of the yeshiva building. All were delighted by this monumental six-story building. Without a doubt, it was one of the most prestigious structures erected in pure Poland. The architect was Agenor Smul-Chowalski. Yeah.
Get next.
So over here, that is.
Actual photo we like printed on the wall. And it was just some them all eating dinner for the they in the corner of the same scarf.
What's this? This is. So right here, guys, this is the funeral of is this the funeral of Meir Shapiro? I believe this was the funeral of Meir Shapiro. This was many years later, though.
That's his wife then.
Where?
Here on the bottom.
This one here? This is his wife.
Malka Tova.
Second on the right. So yeah. Oh no, this one. Wow.
Meir Shapiro?
He was the head of yeshiva for 12 years. Students remember him as a great teacher, genius, and expert in Judaism.
Wow. I have to read everything in full.
Oh, I got you. Kirial Usminia, Nisikal Trizilata. Waha Piesia, E Zunio, Zapasal, C Jaco, with Polyania. Thank you guys. Thanks so much.
I'll continue.
That was great.
You know, did I say it right?
It was speak Polish.
Oh. On May 19th, Rabbi Shapiro's wife, Malka Tova, dies. She's buried in Warsaw in the cemetery on Ulika Okapawa. The couple was childless.
Polish is weird. He was a rabbi in Polish, whatever. Following World War II, he settled in the United States, and later in Israel, in 1958, he traveled to Poland to bring the ashes of Meir Shapiro.
Maybe it doesn't mean it's a little ashes.
What is fake ashes?
That's what it says. That's very odd.
Any other thoughts, Rabbi?
There is a. It's possible that they simply. I don't know this part of the story. I mean, it implies that somehow he was later taken. Yes.
This was the March 1st funeral.
Yes, 1933. I said 34. Okay.
So there wouldn't be a coffin.
Unless the Nazis knew that he was iconic for the Jews. The implication is they took the coffin out of the ground and they burned it. That would be the only explanation if that's somehow real, if that's a true thing. But why speculate when we can look these things up?
No, but then
Rabbi Shapiro was that he was uniting kind of a force. Everybody held by him. Everybody loved him. Look, he got the endorsement, the Chavetz Chaim and the Imre Emes. Everybody saw he was out for Klal Yisrael.
He said that his brother left from Israel to Poland with his ashes. Oh, to bring the ashes to Israel.
Something. There's a backstory there that we have to fill in. I'm not sure what it means.
You were saying earlier that yeshiva was like time-bound status, basically.
Oh yeah.
But I thought around like those times, people would like stand for women who were like crippled and super ugly because they assumed they were married to like a Talmud Chacham.
Well, when you get a Schmitz girl, it could be that she was ugly, but she was a great girl with great midos.
Doesn't say.
But I'm saying I thought it was like
Today we all think, oh, she's like all beautiful.
I thought it was like the worst of the worst for just
What's the explanation?
back in those days? Like at a certain point.
Why?
Isn't that what you said or something?
What's the explanation?
No, I just said that they were in great demand. Girls, strong families, great.
In general, I thought that like he was looked as a very not.
No, it depends. In Europe, like very much today in the Haredi world, a learner, somebody who could sit and learn all day long, that was the Spitz. That's what you saw. One of my sons, Baruch Hashem, very talented in learning. He was already, when he was 17, we got yeshiva. We were already on the prowl, looking out for him. We let him come out of the classroom. But when we were on the other side, I saw things like this. About what? No, I said that in us. Persia. We were outside in Persia. Derech was never because he didn't have a real job. Persians didn't have that same thing. This is very American to Hashem. And the commentary is not even that's Persian Jews. That's what I said.
For Shana Beis to come back Shana Gimel next year, so Bezras Hashem wants to sort for us. What we didn't get in Heilig at Lublin was a more extended time in the yeshiva, that we could do the proper kavod for the place and learn some Torah longer. But we did get a little bit of learning in, Baruch Hashem. I started to say as we were pulled in here that Lublin has been a center of Torah for many years. We talked about we could move. Tomasz, we can start going. To Kotsk. So, certain highlights, certain generations, you want to just make a mental note of and recognize that we were here. So we talked about Rav Yaakov Polak, we talked about Rav Shalom Shachna. In the Chos of Lublin had the comment, Rav Shalom Shachna, apparently I don't know how they know these things, the Hasidim have certain ways of knowing certain things that most of us can't understand, that he knew that all the souls of the tzaddikim moved from their various distant lands to Eretz Yisrael. Rav Shalom Shachna stayed behind in Lublin. Rabbi Orenstein?
No, he's not. He's not here.
Good call.
Why are we not good at attendance?
Yeah, we suck.
We're really bad at that.
Where's Tomasz?
Tomasz.
He's here.
Tomasz, just trust me, he's here.
Don't worry, guys. We have Tomasz.
Okay, I'm going to continue then until Rabbi Orenstein comes. We have a way of reaching Rabbi Orenstein?
What do you mean? That's Tomasz.
Anybody have his contact?
Yeah.
Okay, let's try to reach out to him.
You do the same thing to me all the time. Not to like.
So, the Masorah was that he stayed behind Rav Shalom Shachna, his nefesh, as it were, so that people could come and daven and get his compassion. He was the continuation of this great tradition of pilpul that was so controversial that it stopped. But he was also one of the, like his Rebbe, he taught a world. He was one of the gedolim in the world, and he never left any writings. Even though we don't associate the following people with Lublin formally, because many of them branched out into other cities, as we've heard, many of the gedolim moved around. But Rav Shalom Shachna was the Rebbe of the Ramah. So you hear, and those of you who are trying to piece together the Masorah, it's important to do this. Understand it's all one chain of tradition. In fact, the Ramah was such a diligent student that he married, his first wife at least, he married Rav Shalom Shachna's daughter, who only survived till she was 20. But in addition, I mentioned before, among the students were Rav Chaim ben Betzalel, who was a gadol in that day. Perhaps he wasn't as famous as his younger brother, who's known to us as the Maharal, later in his life of Prague. And I mentioned Rav Yeshua Falk, who wrote some of the great commentaries on the Tur and on the Shulchan Aruch and on parts of the Sma, on parts of the Shulchan Aruch as well, and Miras Yinayim. So this is sets forth now Torah in this part of the world. Remember how the Taz, he said they came to Poland to a more receptive welcome. The non-Jews recognized the Jews brought a certain greatness. They certainly helped the economy wherever the Jews were, as much as they persecuted us at their own expense, but we always made them richer. And fast forward, one of the students that I didn't mention, his name was, we saw the plaque along the way where his base medrash once stood on the road, where there's a road right now, was the Marshal, Rav Shlomo Luria. Rav Shlomo Luria was a cousin of the Ramah, and Rav Greenwald was disappointed we may not get to his kever, because some of you have been learning some Marshal, right? Also known as the Chochmei Shlomo, Yamshel Shlomo as well, Yamshel Shlomo and Sanhedrin. We're going to try to get to Warsaw by 8.
What time is it right now?
He's in Warsaw?
No, so the Marshal is up the street here, buried in Lublin. one of the older, his kever was destroyed, but then, like we saw yesterday at the Kfarim, there's the old fragments of the kever, and then a new matzeva, a new tombstone that's put down in its place. The cousins were absolutely in a great mutual respect, but they went at it. They didn't argue, they didn't agree on everything. And in one particularly harsh exchange, the Marshal criticized the Ramah's use of Hebrew grammar, which is important. If you don't understand grammar, you can misunderstand the pshat and possibly the halacha. So in his criticism, he said, my cousin, "Ata mankiv scharim v'ata mazkir nekevos." You make the which is funnier sounding in Hebrew, but I'll translate anyway. You make the masculine feminine, and you make the feminine masculine. So the Ramah, who also gave as good as he gets, he came back and he said, with all due respect to your cousin, I'm no good I'm not nearly the grammarian that you are, but in my psak halacha I'm correct. The Ramah encouraged, we didn't say this yesterday, but the Ramah encouraged many different areas of study. He studied Kabbalah. He encouraged people to go into history. One of his Talmidim was Rav David Gantz, who was a great historian, wrote early Jewish histories. To our knowledge, his matzeva, in a different place, is the first one that's known to feature the icon that is known today as the Magen David, but at the time was not associated with Judaism. Until about that point. His history books, in turn, were among those that the Chassam Sofer encouraged his students to learn in Preshburg. If you're hearing how all of this is interconnected. The Marshal was a very strong critic of a lot of things. He was he was a bold, strong-willed, opinionated figure who rejected the pilpul that was captivating much of his generation. He also he objected to the breakout of these halachic codes, much like his student the Bach. He said they simplified to the point that you can't always paskin halacha. This is why sometimes if you look up your subject on the pages of the Shulchan Aruch, you don't always know the correct way of applying it in your life. Without all the nuances, how life is so complicated, you don't always know how to go from point A to point B. So he advocated that students, even non-poskim, just the regular student, should have a general fluency in Gemara, Rashi, Tosfos, the major Rishonim, the major Achronims, before they came to conclusion about how to live their lives, how to paskin. All that being said, and the Marshal was huge. Marshal was a presence and somebody that whose opinion till today is dominant in our literature. Maybe these names, I don't know. Marshal, who's familiar with the name? Hands up. Who knows the name Marshal? If in 20 years we're all going to get together for a reunion, I'm going to ask the question. You're going to throw tomatoes at me. You say, Rebbe, don't insult us. The Marshal's my best friend.
20 years.
I'll tell you, we were sitting in the front here, and Yosef was shagging a Mishnah, and he said, look, Rebbe, look, I'm so excited. What was he saying? He saw a reference, an idea said in the name of the Tosos Yantiv. And this idea that when you go to the kever, right, you become fast friends, and they become fixtures in your life from that point on. You're going to remember these names. Fast forward. Okay, now Hasidus is broken out. Right, and it's a viable force. Do you know that in a generation, 90% of Poland and really creeping into Hungary and Russia, the Jews have become Hasidic. And this is under the Magid of Mezheritz and later under the Noam Elimelech. So I mentioned yesterday, the Noam Elimelech had a dynamic student named the Chozeh of Lublin. He was called the Chozeh, the seer, ironically in a way, because he, as a young boy, covered his eyes in with a bandage. That's one way of being makpid on Shmiras Einayim. We're not necessarily recommending it for everybody in Derech, but there is a big inyan of trying to guard your eyes from the evils, from the temptations of sight in this world. And he went later on without them, but from that point, his vision was not great. His actual physical vision was not great, and one of his eyes, his left eye, was swollen abnormally. And it was very striking in appearance, but he was a tzaddik, a peerless tzaddik, and he moved to Lublin. Lublin was mostly a bastion of misnagdim, of people who opposed the new Hasidic movement. And when he came, he did not find the warm reception. But essentially, as the stories are told, and maybe they're exaggerated, but he in large degree won over Lublin, which became a great Hasidic center under the Chose. And even though he was the official figurehead of all of Hasidus in the world, but his base was in Lublin, and the stories are grand. And you should read the biographies. You should read about how all of his students would greet Shabbos all wearing beautiful white garments. And he was maybe physically, ironically, not one of great vision, but he had intense vision. He could see long into the future. So he predicted that on his birthday, he was born on 1815. In the year of 1815, give me a second. No, wrong. He died in 1815. He was born in 1741. Died in 1815. He said at that time, that was around the time that the Russians had actually conquered this area, this part of Poland. And the Russians were not our friends. They were more brutal than the Poles to us. And he predicted that it would take 100 years, but that the Russians would be ousted. So in the middle of what they call World War I, exactly 100 years later, 1915, the Austrians purged Lublin of the Russians. And they featured in the newspaper the next day, a tiny little feature article, the prediction of this Jewish rabbi, 100 years exactly earlier. So indeed, he was something of a visionary, even though we don't have prophecy nowadays. The Chose of Lublin was somebody who already started to realize, he had a vision to realize that as much as the Hasidim and the Misnagdim were engaged in a war, there had already been a much larger, more ferocious war brewing, and that, of course, was with secularism, with modernity, with the Enlightenment, and that it was time for the Hasidim and the Misnagdim to make up, to pool their own efforts, so that they could confront these much greater dangers in the world. And that was the generation of Rav Chaim Volozhin. It was Rav Chaim's Rebbe's, the Graz approach to Hasidus, to not even talk to them. To talk to them would be to give them some kavod, to give them some legitimacy. Famous Maisa with the Balatanya and the another great Rebbe whose name is escaping me for the moment, who tried to get into the Gra to speak to him. He would not even receive them. He would not welcome them. And there are different theories suggested why not, but one of them is that by seeing them, it simply legitimates them. He felt Hasidus was not legitimate. By the days of Rav Chaim Volozhin already, the Hasidim were part of the landscape. You couldn't deny them. You couldn't, and so Rav Chaim already was much more agreeable to discussion. And this is the time of the Chose. And there's a sense, even though things were, it's not like they made up and pretended nothing happened. Even till today, there are important differences between Hasidim and Misnagdim, or what do we call them, Litvish, Yeshivas Jews, and the ideologies are not the same, and we didn't really broach all of them. There's really a central topic that I'm just going to say the word, and I'm not going to explain it, but just you register this idea. It's an idea of tzimtzum k'pshuto, tzimtzum shelo k'pshuto. What does it mean when Hashem created the world and He contracted Himself to make room for the physical? This is lays at the center of much of the ideological rift between Hasidim and Misnagdim. It was never resolved, and there are many ramifications, and we'd be intellectually dishonest to deny them in the sake of trying to make friends. But there was a unity, and there is a unity in the world today, in the religious world, realizing that at least those who are trying to serve Hashem sincerely need to bond together in the face of our greater problems. So my last point now, on our way to Kutsk for a very brief stop. I don't want to talk now. What I will do, and it's tricky for me to do this. I already sense that some of you are kind of nodding off to sleep, which makes sense in the dark, and we've had a full day. But I'm going to get on the mic before we get there, because I don't have time to talk there. And it's one of the most spectacular stories that we have to tell now. And I'll try to tell it on the bus. But before then, I know some of you are cramming in your Mishnayos. But if you can find maybe when you get to a point that you can't learn Mishnah anymore, pick up the papers we're about to pass out and go through a selection. It's just a partial selection. I'm sure you have your own Kutzker sayings that I have amassed over the years to give a sense of the unusual and the profound thinking of this figure. I'll say this much by way of introduction. The Kutzker Rebbe's been called the Saraf, the burning angel.
as a kid, he had that personality. The other kids called him Black Mendel, Rav Menachem Mendel Morgenstern. And as he grew up, he took that personality and he applied it in the service of Hashem. He saw the world that he came into was one that was riddled with what he felt was intellectual dishonesty, and he came to try to clean that up, to seek emes in the least hypocritical, most sincere and pure way. I think you'll find in these penetrating quotations very much an eager intellect trying to get people to think beyond their frivolity, beyond their own hypocrisies, and to try to seek a life of greater honesty in trying to serve Hashem properly. So these are for the ages. Some of us, anybody who knows me for sure knows there's not a day that goes by without me quoting it. I hope the same will be true by all of you soon too. So take these, learn them, and what I'll ask when we get there is if anybody has a favorite piece or a piece that really resonates with you that you want to highlight or maybe have a comment on. Good.
Let's do this.
Yes,